What is up, everybody? We're back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. Operation Rusty. Going to wrap this up. And I'm anxious to get through this because I have a bunch of more Reinhard Gehlen stuff I want to get to. Really cool stuff. More specifics on the origins of the Gehlen organization and whatnot. So, yeah, exciting things to come. Let us begin. Estimate of the situation as of February 1946. The further development of the military political situation of Russia after October 1945. Note, the development of the Russian question in the decades which have just gone by has been accompanied by so much making of propaganda that a really objective consideration of the underlying facts is not very easy for one not familiar with the material. For the better understanding of the train of thought in this work, therefore, in Project B-132 is appended a statement made in 1943 by the former Red Russian colonel about the general lines of Russian policy up to 1943, an evaluation of the reports from the newspapers and the radio between 1st of November 1945 and 10th of February 1946 is appended in project number B-129 as a basis for judging the Russian military political situation. The following pages attempt to continue a discussion of the beginning of October 1945 and sketch briefly the further development of the military and political situation in Russia in the same manner as before for the last few months. It must be borne in mind that within the scope of this work, many questions can no more than be touched upon, and that many problems will remain unclarified. The following statement was made about the basic line of Russian policy in the paper of October 1945 already referred to. Quote, before arriving at a judgment about the role which Russia is playing as a military political factor in the Europe of today, one must attempt to fix the basic line of Russian policy. Difficulty risen in this regard to the extent that Russia is occupied even more intensively than other nations in concealing her cards, political, military, and economic, and in preventing a view through the well-known Iron Curtain around its area of sovereignty and influence. The probable general line, therefore, can be traced only from the indications shown by the diplomatic behavior of Russia since the ending of the war. This behavior has been marked by a succession of demands through which Russia has signified its interest for the future even outside its present realm of influence. Its attitude towards the demands and the points of view of the Western Allies, moreover, shown the desire gradually to eliminate all outside influence over its newly won area of political control. Within the scope of the picture of the last few months, it will not be assumed at this time, i.e. October 1946, that behind the scenes Russia is pursuing a war policy. Nevertheless, one should by no means believe that Russia will avoid the danger of war under any circumstances in the striving for its goals, since Russia is fully conscious that neither the United States nor Great Britain is at the moment able or willing to take upon itself a forcible breach with Russia. Russia will follow a strong demanding policy, which in its manner and in the extent of its claims will the boundary determined by the prestige of these negotiating with it. In accordance with the entire mentality of the Russians, the first goal of its politics will be the securing and consolidation of the newly won political positions, and at the same time, the securing of against future attack from any quarter, as the Russians think that implies the necessity for having political footholds even outside the area which has been conquered in Western Europe, in the Mediterranean, and in the Near East. The Russians will proceed by stages in this policy of theirs, but will not be afraid to exploit quickly favorable opportunities and weakness of its diplomatic opponents in quick diplomatic negotiations. The intervening development has confirmed the correctness of this judgment, but at the same time, a further clarification of Russian behavior and intentions in a long view has become possible. It can already be seen that within the scope of the immediate goals formulated Above, the possibility of passing over to a political offensive has been prepared for. Before going into this idea further, a link should be made to the development of Russian policy in preceding decades for better understanding. The peculiarity of the Russian governmental system implies that all energies of the entire nation be aligned with the political desires of the moment of the supreme leaders of Russia. These, therefore, are able to change the goals, the ways, the means of their policies easily and at a moment's notice. They've shown themselves quite unscrupulous in their changing their policy completely from one day to another. Propaganda undertakes to conceal this policy from outside view so far as it is thought necessary, and to bring into line with the guiding ideas the people within Russia. This alignment finds its expression in the valid general line of Russian policy at a given moment. Russian policy since October Revolution has been marked by the following general lines. For details, see project number B132. Number 1. 1917 to March 1921. Total and immediate revolution is to be carried out everywhere. The period of the attempt to effect general revolution, world revolution, up to the revolt of Kronstadt. 2. March 1921 to 1927. National Revolutionnaire Divizione v Strana Vostoka. My Russian's no good. The National Revolutionary Movement in the Orient. The period of activity in the Near and Far East. The period within Russia of the NEP. I don't know what that is. 3. 1928 to 1933. Pila Tiletka, 5-year plan. The period of internal communist expansion and the intensified industrialization after the abandonment of the NEP. 1933 to 38. Narodine Fronty, the Popular Front movements. This period of intensified foreign activity attempts to intensify differences in Europe. And number 5, 1939 to 1945, Soviet patriotism, the period of the expansion of the Russian area of power during the Second World War, in parentheses, the occupation of eastern Poland, of the Baltic states, the encroachment upon Finland, the occupation of Bessarabia and the war between Russia and Germany. Since the general line applicable at any given time received corresponding expression in propaganda, the attempt was made in Project B-129 to gain basic insights into the leading ideas of Russian political military policy from statements in the newspapers and over the radio. The evaluation was concluded before Stalin's speech. Stalin's speech, which speaks for itself, must be regarded as a confirmation of the insights which have been gained. The following picture of the military and political situation of Russia at the present time is derived from the consideration of past Russian policy, of the development after the armistice, and of the material which has been evaluated hitherto. I bet you guys never thought that Russian history would be so fascinating, huh? 1. The main weight of Russian policy at the moment is at home within the scope of broad program of industrial expansion which emphasizes war production and armaments. The goal of this program is to overcome the weariness setting in after the victory won as soon as possible, and at the same time to strengthen Russian military strength so much that it will in the future be superior to any possible coalition of other powers. 2. Connected with this policy is the desire to consolidate the military and political gains which have been made, both by aligning towards Russia in military and political ways the peoples of the territories which have been occupied, and by gathering these peoples as closely as possible into Russian economy, culture, and thought, even in matters of religion. 3. An essential point in this program is the gaining and consolidation of corresponding strategic and political outposts, particularly in the Near East and in the Mediterranean, using force, probably concealed if necessary. 4. On the whole, however, Russia will probably seek to avoid by all other means the danger of a global war in the next few years. On the other hand, it will not shun local armed disturbances with the neighboring states for reaching the goals outlined above. the world situation and the knowledge that the United States and England as well are not inclined to run the risk of a new worldwide scale war will induce Russia to press with its demands to the most extreme limit that the prestige of the states negotiating with it will allow. 5. Over and above all, this one must not fail to recognize that in the last few months, Russian policy has taken on a renewed offensive character in reviving the conception of two worlds in opposition to each other, the pseudo-democratic capitalistic world and the genuine democracy of communism. If the colonial question is ranged alongside this one, and an official personage like Zhukov takes up the Indian question in a paper of the two worlds opposed to each other, emphasized particularly by Stalin himself, can have only the confrontation purpose, on the one hand, of justifying the war economy expansion program to the Russian people by the fiction of the threat from without, and the purpose, on the other hand, of laying open all the possibilities for a policy of expansion in the more distant future, which would be of necessity first to have devote itself to the destruction of the British Empire. 6. It seems that the idea of world revolution as a political means of struggle and propaganda has reappeared in a new and different form in the Russian political conception. This idea takes the stage again as the struggle of true democracy with a national and federal background for the liberation of the oppressed peoples, of pseudo-democracy and capitalism. The appearance of the idea seems to indicate that Russia is striving to achieve its goals in foreign policy, primarily by political means. On the other hand, the clever use of this thesis gives Russia opportunity to solve immediate questions rising on its borders by concealed use of force. Seven, the policy of Russia in UNO, it's United Nations, I believe, affords a measure for future development of Russian policy in the long view. As soon as the clear line of exertion to break up the UNO or find a favorable pretext to resign from it shows itself without regard to the tenuous diplomatic moves of the moment, this will have to be regarded as a sign of uncertainty. In sum, the general line which has been taken by Russia or by Russian policy since the end of the war from military and political points of view may be described as follows. It is the period of regrouping and military reinforcement of all temporal and spiritual forces of the Russian people, with a consolidation of the territories which have been gained now that the war has been won. It is the period of preparation for a coming showdown, which the Russians believe to be possible between them and the surrounding capitalistic world by softening up the possible opponents by political means and by winning favorable and strategic political jump-off positions. All right. Memorandum on the military and political situation in Europe and the Near East. Memorandum on the military and political situation in Europe and the Near East. 1. Prefactory remarks. 2. Previous evaluation of the situation. 3. New factors influencing judgment of situation since the spring. 1. Russian press propaganda. 2. Russia's diplomatic attitude. 3. The military picture. 4. Indications for increasing military preparedness. There's always that, isn't there? Section 4. Conclusions drawn from reports of strategic intelligence. 1. Internal situation in Russia and the occupied countries. 2. Ideas on foreign policies of the Russian leaders. 3. Zhukov's role and intentions in the Balkans and Near East. 4. Intentions in Central Europe. And final conclusions. 5. Appendix 1, first strategic intelligence reports concerning ideas of Russian leaders. And Appendix 2, reports concerning indications for increasing military preparedness on the part of the Russian army, especially in the general European area. All right, the prefactory remarks. The first reports from reliable Near East sources concerning the ideas of the Russian leaders enable us to render a temporary judgment on the present military and political situation in Europe and the Near East, which up to now has been rather vague. The sources at our disposal do not include the North European area, so that for the time being, the gap in observation and estimation necessarily remains at that point. Confirmation of the reports from June and July period is necessary, and we are trying to get it. In judging both the reports and the situation as a whole, it must not be forgotten that at the present time, the political constellations are rapidly changing, and the political scene in its entirety is acquiring new nuances from the developments during and after the Paris Conference. So one thing I have to comment on really quickly is that the overwhelming totality of everything we're reading here shows that back then they were quite aware, post-World War II, of Soviet Russia under Stalin and its continued imperialistic goals, right? This is kind of changing my thesis on imperialism in the world, right? And colonialism in the world, because allegedly we were supposed to have ended the age of colonialism, like, after we killed all the Indians, right? Which justifies us killing all the Indians, because that was in the age of colonialism, right? We were still expanding around the world. And that allegedly came to an end, but I don't think it ever really did. I don't think it ever came to an end, ever. And I think that kind of, when you come to understand that, you kind of understand World War II a little better. You kind of understand Hitler's intentions a little better. And Hitler's intentions really were, besides the reclaiming of the German people in the Rhineland and in Czechoslovakia, he did look to intrude upon Poland for being a bunch of fucking spineless traitors, and collaborating with the Soviets. And he planned on carving a big piece of Poland and the Soviet Union out for Germany. That's pretty goddamn obvious, right? That's pretty apparent. But to me, that just becomes, once you realize that this age of colonialism never really ended. It didn't end in the 1700s, didn't end in the 1800s, didn't end in the 1900s, right? Between the time of Western expansion in America at the end of the 1800s and the creation of Israel was like 75 fucking years, really? And there was no colonial expansion in that 75-year period? Nah, give me a break. The age of imperialism and colonialism never ended. And so it seems as though once upon a time there was a need for NATO if you're a Western country and you're concerned about the expansion of Soviet communism, right? Well, what happens once the communists take over, right? They kill Kennedy, they take over this country. Then what do they still need a NATO for, right? But that's modern day shit, and we're not here to talk about the modern era, ever. So, continuing on. Previous evaluation of the situation. The evaluation report of 12-246, Project B-133 for the War Department, portrayed the present Russian policy as follows. Quote, "It is the period of the regrouping and military reinforcement of all material and psychological forces of the Russian people with the consolidation of the territories which have been gained now that the war has been won. It is the period of preparation for a coming showdown which the Russians believe to be possible between them and the surrounding capitalist world by softening up the possible opponents by political means and by winning favorable political and strategic jump-off positions. In the question of Russia's attitude towards a solution by force of arms of current questions, the following judgment was offered. Quote, on the whole, however, Russia will probably seek to avoid by all means the danger of a global war in the next few years. On the other hand, it will not shun local armed disturbances with the neighboring states for reaching the goal outlined above. The world situation and the knowledge that the USA and England, as well, are not inclined to run the risk of a new world-scale war will induce Russia to press its demands to the extreme limits that the prestige of the states negotiating with her will allow. It is the purpose of the following considerations and conclusions to determine to what extent an alteration or modification of this judgment will be necessary. 3. New factors influencing judgment of the situation since the spring. In recent months, the following new factors have been recognized as characterizing the Russian attitude. 1. Russian press propaganda. Quite remarkable is the extraordinarily vigorous campaign of the Russian press designed to emphasize repeatedly for the benefit of the domestic public of the possibility of a new war of aggression of the capitalist states against Russia. 2. Russia's diplomatic attitude. Russia's sharp language at the international conference table, for instance Paris, as well as its attitudes towards all international problems, raises the question whether Russia is really interested only in the solution of a certain single problem, or whether her attitude is not rather motivated by far-reaching political intentions. 3. The military picture. Since about June, the military picture indicates that the main effort more and more was shifted to the Central European area, Germany and Poland. This is shown by A, the fact that 5 of 6 of all operational armed forces of Russia are stationed in the Central European area. All armored armies except the 6th, which is assumed to be in the Far East, 5th armored in the East Prussian area, Minsk. B, despite demobilization, the total number of forces in Germany and Poland has not been decreased since the beginning of the year, but probably been increased in Poland. 2/3 of the Russian occupation troops employed in Europe are stationed in Germany and Poland. Their strength far exceeds the demands of ordinary occupation. C, the relative strength of these forces compared to the American and British forces in numbers and armor is so superior that military operations of a surprising nature could be started without a prior concentration of force. The military picture in the Balkans, insofar as we are informed at present, shows no extraordinary symptoms. It must not be forgotten, however, that the intelligence reports from these areas are fragmentary. 4. Indications for increasing military preparedness on the part of the Russian army, especially in the Central European area. Heading. A, to a very large extent, the armaments industry is producing continuously. If a development without considerable tension were expected, the production of weapons will be obsolete in the near future, would be discontinued in favor of more modern ones. Did you see what they just said here? They need to keep engaging in war so they can keep using these weapons, because these ones will just sit around and become obsolete otherwise. B, the armies of the satellite states are being organized and trained with the greatest energy. C, fuel and ammunition is stored in great quantities in the Russian zone of Germany. D, former German airfields in the Russian zone of Germany are repaired and enlarged. E, old bridges are reinforced and new bridges are built for loads of 60 tons. F, measures are taken to make the Iron Curtain impenetrable. G, preparatory measures for organizing and exploiting German manpower potential and increased advertising for a free Germany in the Russian zone. H, maintaining of air raid precautionary measures for the German population. I, efforts to increase the capacity of the railroads. J, apparently an additional increase of forces in the Russian zone of occupation in Germany. And K, supposed stopping of Russian demobilization by Stalin, Order 022 of September 2nd. However, the general state of affairs leads to the assumption that this report has been played into the hands of the American and British intelligence services for a very definite purpose. Section 4, conclusions drawn from reports of strategic intelligence. As yet, we have at our disposal no really effective reconnaissance in depth and strategic intelligence. A first attempt to revive formerly reliable sources has brought the enclosed reports. Without confirmation from other sources of reconnaissance in depth, these reports constitute in themselves an inadequate foundation for final judgment. A careful evaluation of them together with the impressions gained from other sources leads to the following. 1. Internal situation in Russia and the occupied countries. The war, its aftermath, and the intruding of European thoughts and civilization as a result of occupational duties have created certain tensions in the Russian interior. Apparently, they have resulted in the present purge, the extent of which cannot be determined at this time. Whether the number of victims mentioned in the report is accurate or not can only be established by further intelligence. However, these purges cannot in any way be considered as signs of a decisive domestic weakening, which might in turn affect the political and military power of the USSR. On the contrary, they must be considered as constituting one of the familiar prophylactic measures of Stalin, their effect can be compared with the bothersome nature of a strong cold on the human organism. Conditions in the satellite states appear to be different insofar as apparently a certain illegal and not yet fully suppressed opposition is to be found there. Whether in this respect the conditions in Poland may be considered as being as serious as they are described in the report must be determined by additional intelligence. 2. Ideas on foreign policy of the Russian leaders. There can be no doubt that the fundamental line of Russian thinking on foreign policy continues to be the conviction of a necessary showdown with the Western capitalistic world for achieving the final goal of a communistic world order. At present, however, Russian thinking along these lines seems to be determined by predominantly defensive factors. With due consideration of the Russian mentality, the political line of thoughts of the Russian governmental leaders could be characterized as follows. The political thought of Soviet government is dominated by the most extreme mistrust of the so-called capitalist states which are suspected of planning an attack against the Soviet Union, or at least of establishing an overpowering political coalition. This suspicion is demonstrated by exaggerated sensitivity with which the Soviet government reacts upon every single newspaper article which appears anywhere throughout the world, or upon the speech of any foreign statesman, as well as by the aggressive spirit of the Soviet efforts to influence politically and psychologically an increasing number of countries in order to prepare for the future incorporation of these countries into the Soviet Union. The actions of the Soviet government are apparently based on the political theory of the necessity of creating a security zone which would make the Soviet Union immune to attack from outside, and whose single parts would furthermore be favorable political and strategic starting points for any struggle with the Western powers. The Soviet government thinks that this goal will only have been reached when in all neighboring countries governments have been set up on which it can absolutely rely. Therefore, it will not rest until the governmental setups in Iran, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary have undergone transformations which will guarantee their complete subjection to the desires of the Soviet Union. With regard to Germany, the Soviet government is trying to prepare the ground for similar development, with a special emphasis on the attempt to convince the German people that only a close association with the Soviet Union can bring the possibility of a restoration of German national and economic unity. The Soviet government views the domination of the entire Central European area as a preliminary objective, which is considered the indispensable condition for the guaranteeing of Soviet security. All right, let me just comment real quick. It seems pretty obvious to me what the fuck is going on here. There's been an inversion has happened, okay? Once upon a time, it was the Jews who took over the Soviet Union through the revolution and destroyed, killed how many fucking Christians through Holodomor and all that stuff. And but at some point there was an inversion, right? The Jewish Soviet Union fell in the 1990s, and then we have Putin, who set up state capitalism, who's not a Jew, basically replaced all the Jews. Now all the Jews answer to Putin in Russia, right? And it's the Jews who took over the West, right? So there was this massive inversion, and this is why this war still continues, I guess, against Russia. Right, but now it's the Jews are on the other side. Once they killed Kennedy, they took over America and the West, and Putin is the one who's fighting for like freedom and virtues now, which is kind of unbelievable. All right, let me continue. Soviet aspirations in the Near East, Dardanelles, Iran, Greek question, Turkey, are also obviously influenced by this desire for security that the Near East area in the hand of an enemy of Russia would have decisive strategic significance, need not be emphasized in the era of aerial and atomic warfare. If the foregoing thoughts are correct, then one must conclude that Russia probably could have no interest in prematurely in instigating a conflict with the Western world, since in many respects it can regard time as working for Russian interests. On the other hand, it is quite clear from Mikojan's statements that even in its present condition, Russia is not determined to avoid by all means the risk of a great war. Should the development of political conditions make such a conflict unavoidable, the elasticity in decisions of policy made possible by the Russian system of supreme authority at the top constitutes a very variable and uncertain factor in judging Russian intentions. views and decisions in foreign policy can change surprisingly. So just in hindsight, as being someone who grew up in the age of Reagan and Gorbachev, it seems like Gorbachev might have been that pivotal figure who took Russia or the Soviet Union away from that more Stalinistic style of control, right? Because that's when things really started to change. But at the same time, we were suppressing the economy, and then by the 90s, the economy completely collapsed. Or was it Yeltsin? And then Putin took over after Yeltsin, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not completely up on my Russian history. Zhukov's role and intention in the Balkans and the Near East. The material at hand offers an initial confirmation of the assumption that the transfer of Zhukov was only camouflage for the special purpose of concentrating and unifying all military affairs, preparations, and measures in the Balkans and the Near East. The Russian interest in the preeminence of a solution to the questions in the Near East, above all the Dardanelles, thus seemed to become again more and more prominent. It must not be forgotten in this connection that possibly the Russians cherished the view that in this area, more than in any other, a combination of policy and military might for the purpose of achieving its aims would be more and sooner possible without leading to a major conflict. Since the measures taken to date in the Balkans and the Near East area offer little material for the confirmation of this view, it is obviously necessary to emphasize and intensify our intelligence efforts at those points. For intentions in Central Europe, it is remarkable that the reports offer nothing of great significance concerning the Russian intentions in Central Europe. This can be due to one of the following reasons. A, the main effort of Russia's actual political intentions lies in southeastern Europe, and the military activity in Central Europe is intended to serve primarily as a smokescreen. Or B, the Russian intentions in this area, due to the high degree of secrecy among Russian leaders, cannot be recognized by means of the few sources of strategic intelligence at present at our disposal. The transfer of Zhukov from his command in eastern Germany and the entrusting to him of new tasks in southeastern Europe speaks against the assumption of any far-reaching political intentions in the Central European area at the present time. On the other hand, it must be emphasized that the strength and degree of preparedness of the Russian forces in Central Europe would enable the Russian leaders to take action without any considerable loss of time should the decision to do so suddenly be taken. 5. Final conclusions. Up to now, there's been no reason to change basically the evaluation of the main tendencies of Russian policy mentioned at the start of the report. It does not seem probable that Russian policy is willing at this early stage to take upon itself the risk of a worldwide conflict with the Western powers. Russian policy has two areas from one to the other of which it shifts the main effort of its activity by exploiting the play of diplomatic forces. These are, 1, the Balkans, Near East area, for the solution of the Dardanelles question with the objective of simultaneously controlling Turkey and Iran, and 2, the Central European area for the solution of the German question with the further objective of controlling all of Central Europe. In both areas, military preparations are being made in order to create the possibility of being able to solve certain questions by force of arms if need be. All of these preparations probably serve the essential purpose of enabling the Soviets to influence negotiations with the proper military pressure. It must be pointed out, however, that by any change in the fundamental foreign policy of the Russian government in accordance with the peculiarity of the Russian governmental system, the preparedness for military action could be established with extreme rapidity. The danger that Russia's leaders might make decisions of an adventurous nature would probably only become acute should they deduce from the future attitude and actions of the Western powers that there has been a falling off in the strength and unity exhibited in the Anglo-American policy to date. Whether the assumption that the solution of the southeastern European question has precedence and that the solution of the German question will not be attempted until the second act is correct cannot be finally established until further material is available. Problems and difficulties encountered in Operation Rusty. A. General. B. Problems in the U.S. zone of Germany, and that includes procurement of quarters, gasoline supply, arrests, identification papers, and then C. Travel outside of Germany. Problems and difficulties encountered in Operation Rusty. General, it is felt that a discussion of the problems and difficulties encountered to date in Operation Rusty, plus those which can be foreseen, may simplify the task of those persons who take over the direction of this operation. Some of the problems may have been encountered and solved by other intelligence organizations already. Others may be problems peculiar to Operation Rusty. Problems in the U.S. zone of Germany. 1. Procurement of quarters. The critical housing shortage in Germany necessitates the crowding of many Germans, usually unknown to each other, into all available houses and apartments. Consequently, a man's personal affairs and details of how and where he spends his time become the common knowledge of his community. In the case of people in the higher levels of Operation Rusty, permanent members of the organization, main residents, etc., private houses for them and their staffs are required because they must handle American goods and money in the paying of agents. They must handle a certain amount of paperwork, and they must interrogate and assign missions to agents and informants. The problem which arises is the securing of a house from the appropriate town major, and at the same time maintaining the proper security, i.e. not presenting signed requests from G2, USFET, not answering a lot of questions, keeping German officials, frequently communists, out of the picture as much as possible. 2. Gasoline supply. Until recently, couriers, agents, and other persons using automobiles were issued FOL coupon books, which enabled them to get gasoline and oil from quartermaster supply point. This system was ideal, but was stopped, and now the POL supplies are issued for civilian vehicles. Only when these vehicles are painted OD, carrying proper U.S. markings, and are driven by U.S. personnel. A new system has been set up whereby members of the organization can obtain gasoline and oil from presentation of a special identification card and password at certain specified CIC supply points. New arrangements may be necessary when Operation Rusty is transferred to a new agency. 3. Arrests. Agent and informants receive payment for services in the form of Allied marks and American goods. Coffee, sugar, and flour, etc. The crowded housing conditions mentioned in paragraph B1 above make it impossible to hide these things. Suspicions of black market activities arise, and frequently one of the many Germans who think their stay in the purgatory of denazification is shortened by cooperating with military government denounces the agents. When an agent is arrested, it is sometimes weeks before the information group knows it, and his release can be affected by G2 USFET. This not only undermines the agent's confidence in the organization, but it causes delay in the completion of missions and sometimes threatens security. To overcome this problem, 2 things have been done. First, 11 key men of the organization have a password which identifies them to CIC regional chiefs. When an agent is arrested, one of these 11 men goes to the nearest CIC regional chief and notifies him of the arrest. He in turn takes steps to prevent interrogation by the arresting agency, thus reducing the security threat. Second, a letter is given to agents authorizing them to have certain items in their possession. This letter is signed by a fictitious officer who supposedly is a member of a technical intelligence who has a telephone listed under this agency. The telephone number with a request to refer questions to that number is given in the letter. In the event that the arresting agency decides to check the authenticity of the letter and calls, it is told that the agent is making a survey of factories in the U.S. zone and his release is requested. The 2 measures mentioned above have produced the desired result in most instances. However, they do not prevent at least temporary detention in many cases. Reasons for arrest other than one described above are many and varied. Law enforcement agencies such as the Constabulary Military Police and German Military Government Police conduct frequent raids on areas selected at random or suspected of housing black marketers. Roadblocks are established at unexpected times and places, and vehicles are searched at these blocks. Inspections are made on trains. These things lead to the discovery of items not usually available to Germans except through black market channels, and usually the result is arrest. 4. Identification papers. At present, there is no standard method of providing members of the organization with the many papers Germans are required to carry. He's talking about the East Germans. These papers must be provided because it takes a German weeks or months to get them through ordinary channels. The appropriate stamps and a supply of signed blank forms should be obtained through military government for intelligence purposes. Means of securing forged and counterfeit documents for use outside of the U.S. zone should be arranged. Some members of the organization cannot appear before the denazification boards because As former members of the German General Staff Corps and of intelligence agencies, they are liable to heavy fines and imprisonment. Their services would be lost and security jeopardized. Steps have been taken to keep them away from these boards, but other provisions must be made whereby they can have their identity cards stamped as though they had been before the boards and had been classified, tried, and punished. C. Travel outside of Germany. The building of the Organization for Strategic Intelligence presents the greatest problem. It is necessary for various members of the information group to personally contact the heads of various groups mentioned in Tab D. These groups will not supply information unless the initial contacts are made by persons known to them and trusted by them. These persons from the information group may be accompanied by U.S. personnel, but they must be there personally themselves. Conflicts with State Department policies arise and are not easily settled favorably. In addition, it is difficult to obtain permission for Germans to enter such countries, such as redacted, etc. Such permission is essential to the success of the efforts to get strategic information from Russia and her satellites. If it were possible to give a member of the organization a U.S. passport to be used to gain entrance to the foreign countries, matters would be greatly simplified. The passport would be returned to the proper authorities upon the completion of the trip, and the bearer would revert from his role as a U.S. civilian employee of the War Department to his normal role in life. This problem should be solved as soon as possible. The time factor is critical for the following reasons. 1. The controlling elements of the groups mentioned in Tab D, now awaiting instruction from Mr. Galen and Mr. Bond, many tire of waiting and seek new supporters or may turn to other types of work. 2. It is known that the redacted are doing everything in their power to persuade some of these groups to work for redacted. 3. The longer the groups lie dormant in the intelligence field, the less valuable they become. Action recommended. Operation Rusty be continued. Operation Rusty be transferred to SSU. Operations be directed from the United States. Officers be attached to G2 USFET. Liaison. Solution of problems mentioned in Tab H. Representatives of Lieutenant General Vandenberg visit G2 USFET. Organization be used as a unit. Selection of new directing personnel. And 10. Decision. 1. That Operation Rusty be continued under the direction of USFET for a period of not more than 90 days so that the transfer of the operation can be done gradually. That Operation Rusty be transferred to SSU at the end of the 90-day period, or sooner as it is feasible. That Operation Rusty be directed from the United States direction of the expanded organization from within Germany is not practicable. That 2 officers, preferably with German language qualifications, be attached to G2 USFET for 90-day periods to take an active part in the direction of the operation so that they will be thoroughly familiar with it when it is transferred to SSU. These officers should be selected from among those who will actually direct the operation in the future. They should not be liaison officers who will have only the task of orienting and directing the group at the end of 90-day period. That during the 90-day period, orientation, close liaison be maintained between G2, USFET, and SSU in Washington, D.C., so that SSU can utilize this period in preparing itself for the transfer. This will facilitate the transfer and ensure the continued smooth functioning of Operation Rusty. 6. That during the 90-day period, SSU study the problems presented in Tab H, and that these problems be solved during this period if possible. 7. The personal representatives, Lieutenant General Vandenberg, be sent to G2 to discuss directly with Mr. Galen and Mr. Bond any questions arising out of this entire study. At a meeting between these men, it is felt that all questions can be answered satisfactorily. At this meeting, the details of Tab D can be discussed. It is felt that it is too dangerous to put these details on paper, as it was explained to Colonel Galloway, who said that they could be explained verbally at a later date, as was mentioned in Tab E. The representatives should be familiar with costs in the world intelligence market at present and should be able to answer the questions in the 3 numbered considerations given in Tab C and Tab E. 8, that the organization be operated by SSU as a unit and that no attempt be made to merge it with another organization. The leading personalities of the organization have developed it over a period of nearly 30 years. They know the capabilities and limitations of the people with whom they work, and any effort to make them work with people they do not know will greatly reduce their efficiency and perhaps break down their organization. 9, that care be exercised in the selection of new directing personnel. The central figures in this organization are carrying on their work for patriotic and ideological reasons. They are men of high moral standing. They cannot be bought, and they should be treated accordingly. It is known from experience that personality clashes will result in a tremendous setback in this operation. 10, that a decision as to whether or not the U.S. Army will use this organization be rendered as soon as possible. As was pointed out in paragraph C of tab H, time is a critical factor in the future value of this organization to the United States. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of Operation Rusty, which I'm sure there is far, far more to it. So this document began on page 1, ended on page 151, but we've only got 50 pages of it. So what are they hiding? Well, everything. But we will be back tomorrow, where we have a whole other slew of General Reinhard Gehlen documents to go over. If you haven't signed up for my Substack, Bloody History World War II, it's good stuff. And I have signed books available. If you're interested in a signed book, hit me up, email or telegram, and I can get that to you. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.